Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 167. So a quick reminder, if you want to watch this entire video, if you want to access the meditation for these full episodes and as well as the bonus episodes in their entirety, join my online community. It's the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. You will see a link in the show notes to join that. Join some like-hearted individuals. We're already having some really great connection and there's a lot of exclusive content and discounts, other perks as well. So today we are going to talk about allowing space for complexity. And this topic has been coming up so much for me personally, for my clients, for everyone I know in all these different ways. And so whenever that happens, I know it's time to do a show about this, kind of talk through it. And so what am I talking about in terms of this idea of holding space for complexity? What do I mean by complexity? I'm going to start with my personal example here, just to go right into making it a little less abstract. And this is not my story to share, so I'm not going to give you any details. Normally I do, but this is just to illustrate what I'm talking about in terms of complexity. So right now, I'm dealing with some grief and some sorrow about something that happened in my family. Really heavy, really kind of unthinkable event that went on. And at the same time as all of this kind of grief and sorrow and empathy and compassion is in my system, is something that I'm needing to allow to flow through me, because if I try to suppress it or avoid it, it's just going to turn into stored trauma. So I'm very much in that space of grief and sorrow and sadness. And at the same time, I'm really doing this 5D work of expansion, and I've been recording my Mintalk energy activation that's getting ready to come out. The people in my Spiritual Integration Sanctuary group will receive 50% off on that, by the way. So it's this weird dichotomy, it's this weird duality of how do I hold space for these really heavy, dense emotions, for the density of the 3D that's getting even denser. We'll talk a little bit more about that, while also allowing for this really big, beautiful expansion, for the joy and the bliss and this amazing crown opening that we're all being invited to step into right now. It's really disconcerting. As humans, we like order, we like structure, we like to categorize things, we like hierarchies, we like to say this is here and this is up here and this is even lower. We really have a history of doing that, and some might say it's part of our nature as humans. I would say it's part of our nature as 3D humans. So one of the things we're being asked to do as we transition from this 3D type of being, from this denser, heavier, more physical space into the 5D, which is more expanded, more access to unconditional love, is to allow more space. So from an energetic anatomy perspective, the way that we hold space for these seemingly conflicting feelings and ideas and understandings is that we literally make more space in our energetic field. The more space we have in our field, the more we can allow into our field and the less disruptive it is. It's back to that idea of if I take a little bouncy ball and I throw it in a small closet, it's going to go bing, 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 and there's going to be a lot of disruption in that closet. It might even come and hit me in the face and just be really uncomfortable. If I step into a stadium and I throw that bouncy ball, it's not even going to come all the way back to me. So from an energetic anatomy perspective, what we are being asked to do is greatly increase the size of our energetic fields so that we can allow for more frequencies, vibrations to be within the field. And I think this is there's a little bit of a misunderstanding or kind of a misconception about this. A lot of people who are talking about this 3D to 5D transition or ascension or new earth, whatever words they're using for it, this transition that I think we all feel, whether we have the words for it, whether we agree on the language we're using, we're all going through it right now. Every single person I know is going through something, whether they're aware of like the global cosmic energy shift that's going on. Everybody's like, what is happening this year? Oh my gosh. that is purposeful. And the analogy that came to me the other day was the idea of like making a diamond. It's like crushing and crushing and crushing and crushing, and then eventually you get this beautiful gem. Or you can think of the idea of like the Grand Canyon being sort of worn down by water. There is this pressure on us right now. We are being squeezed intentionally so that we will confront some of these things, like these conflicting ideas that we hold, or this idea of everything needing to be all one thing or another. We talked a couple weeks ago about spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. This is directly related to that. So there is this, again, misconception, especially in the New Age community, the wellness community, that once you have reached a certain point, there's your hierarchy right there. Once I get to a certain point, everything will be all light and love and beautiful and wonderful, and all I'll ever share, and I'll actually experience this. And it's not real. Being a human is hard. We are going to have grief. Every single person who is alive is going to experience grief. Someone you know or love, something you know or love is going to leave your life, whether it's because they died, because they move on. We are dealing with grief all the time. Well, most of us aren't dealing with grief. We are being confronted with situations that bring up grief all the time. And at the same time, we are being presented with this opportunity for huge expansion, for a huge step into unconditional love and light. That is the focus of a lot of these people that are like, if I just get my vibration high enough, I won't have to deal with these dense emotions. And you hear people say things about like low frequencies and this idea of it's very judgmental. And that is actually very 3D. So this idea of like all one thing or all the other, all or nothing, black or white, that is 3D thinking. That is not allowing. So unconditional love is all about allowing. It's all about space. It's all about saying, hey, I see your experience and I allow space for you to have that experience. And it's this idea that not only can we allow for someone else to be in a really heavy, dense, fearful or sad vibration while we're in a really expanded vibration. In fact, we might actually be able to help them by creating the space for them to be held. That happens within ourselves as well. With the example I just used, I am very much dealing with some grief and sorrow and sadness and that heaviness and density right now. And I am allowing space for expansion and more unconditional love and more compassion and more opening in my field, making my field larger. The other thing that happens when we make our fields larger is that we become more sensitive. And that can feel sometimes really uncomfortable, but it's actually a gift. Because the more sensitive we are, the more empathy we have, the more understanding and compassion we can have for other people. So that is all part of this transition out of this sort of density, this 3D, this all or nothing hierarchical categorization of it's this thing or that thing, it's all this, it's all that, into this idea of having a space large enough that we can allow for all experiences. It doesn't mean that we want to get stuck in that fearful vibration. That's one of the things that a lot of people are afraid of, or when people are talking about raising your vibration, or when I use the word expanding. This is this idea of allowing for flow. That's what we're really looking for. We're looking for this idea of being in a flow state where I wake up and I remember that this thing happened and I cry and I feel really sad and really sorrowful and like so heavy. And then as that moves through me, I step into being in space with a client and having this beautiful experience of them opening their crown chakra and telling me I feel so much lighter. I feel like I've lost weight. And then I flow back into the sadness again. That is what we're being asked to move into in terms of this 5D is this flow state, is this understanding that it's all part of the experience, that there's no part of your experience that's wrong or bad or doesn't belong. And there's an aspect of faith in this as well. A lot of people I know right now are dealing with really difficult things, whether it's loss, whether it's tragedy, whether it's calamity. Whether it's just like forgetting your computer on the way to the office when you were going to film videos today and having to go home and get it and come back. Like, it runs the gamut, right, of little things that sort of add up to like these really big life-changing things. And it's easy to lose faith in those moments. It's easy to kind of step into that, like, why is this happening to me? And I didn't deserve this, or this other person. No one deserves to have these difficult experiences, but it's part of the experience. It's part of the flow. It's not about being worthy or deserving or, earning something. It's about experience. That is what being human is. And the gift and tragedy of being in this physical plane, in these physical bodies, is this experience. The highest highs, the lowest lows, and the ability to flow between them with minimal effort and to not get stuck. What keeps us stuck is denial. What keeps us stuck is that 3D thinking of, I shouldn't feel this way, I should feel this way. And it goes both ways. So sometimes when we're in a heavier or a denser vibration, it's like, oh, I shouldn't be here. Like, I'll think to myself, I've done all this work and, I shouldn't feel depressed today. I should feel motivated. I should feel inspired. Like, I feel how I feel. Nobody feels motivated and inspired 100% of the time. It's just not possible. So when you allow for that experience, rather than kind of telling yourself, oh, I can't afford to stay here, that's a scarcity belief, right? It's like, okay, I feel this way for now, and I know that that's going to shift, and I allow for the flow. And the more that we allow for the flow, the more we can get back to that expanded vibration. And the same thing happens the opposite way. Sometimes we're in a really expanded, joyful, loving space, and someone else in our life is not. Someone else in our life is dealing with that density or that heaviness or that fear, that sadness, that depression. And we can sometimes feel guilty about being in this really expanded space when someone we care about is in their dense space. And it's this idea, again, of allowing. If I can make enough space, if I can allow enough space for the complexity of all of the emotions, of all of the experiences, it's actually making me emotional. That is what the 5D is really about. That is what true unconditional love and compassion and empathy is really about. Is not necessarily having to join someone where they are, but allowing them to be where they are, just holding the space for them, just creating even more space around them so that when they're in their density, that is literally what I do in my treatment room. Someone comes in with whatever density they're dealing with, and I create a larger space and a welcoming, safe, hopefully, to them environment. I always intend for safety, but you don't know how people will receive it. I create a container that's larger than the one they come into. They come in with some density, and I invite them to release that by creating this larger space, by allowing for it. I don't shame them. I don't say, why are you still holding this trauma in your body? I'm still holding trauma in my body. Who am I to judge? But in that case, when I have more objectivity, when it's not my own system, I have the space, the capacity to open this field so that they can invite themselves to let go, to release a little bit, to step back into that flow, to not get stuck in the density, to recognize they're in it, and then allow for the flow into more expansion. That's really what energy work is. That really is what this transition is all about, is making more space so that everyone has space to be who they are. Letting go of the judgments about otherness, about people who don't agree with us, about people who don't hold the same values as we do. Now, I always say there's nuance here, right? Because there's a line there. There's a gray area that turns into a line about allowing for things like abuse, allowing for things like violence. Like, that is not unconditional love. Sometimes is fierce love. Sometimes it is saying, that's not welcome in my space. And then giving the other person the opportunity to decide who they want to be. Do they want to be someone who steps into this space of love, or do they want to hold a fearful vibration to the point of hurting themselves or others. So there's a line there about that, but in a broader way, we really have developed this society of judgment, and it's internalized. We judge ourselves even more harshly most of the time than we're judging other people. And when we do judge other people, it's a projection of what we're judging about ourselves. So that's why this work, I always say, this work starts with us. This work starts with our internal individual work. How big can I allow my field to be? Because the larger my field is, literally, energetically, the more space there is for other experiences in the field. We talked last week about this idea of quantum superposition and this idea of being in a space that's maybe not the most welcoming, that's not the most loving, but allowing yourself to be in your own field in that space in a way that creates this openness, this love, without encroaching on the other vibration of someone else. And the way we do that is really to, again, make our field so big and so unconditionally loving that their field might be somewhere within our field, but it's not affecting our field because we are vibrating in a more expanded state. So the more expanded we can allow ourselves to be, the more the denseness that's around us no longer affects us. And there is a choice about density. Being in the flow, allowing the density to move, doesn't mean we never have it. It means we allow it to move. Emotions are meant to come up, be felt, and be released. And when you're in a really dense situation, when you've really experienced, when you're really going through it, when it's really rough, sometimes those waves are just coming over and over and over again. It's like being in a hurricane, right? It just keeps coming and you start to think you'll never get through it. That's what we start to shut down. It's like, I can't take this anymore. I can't handle it. My very first experience that I talk about in the introduction of my book, Spiritual Integration, I talk about how I was in this really deep grief about my infertility. And I was in a session with a client, and I was guided to, she was also going through grief, and I was guided to allow us to really let this grief grow. And it was so uncomfortable. It was physically painful. It was this like weight, this squeezing in my chest. And we were both just like crying, and I was like, I can't do this. I kept saying to the unconditional love that was guiding me through this, source energy, I was like, I don't think I can keep going. How much further do you want me to go? How big can this grief get? Because it felt all consuming. It felt like I would literally die from this grief. That's sometimes people say when I talk about this, it sounds like a near-death experience. It felt that way, even though it was an emotional journey. Emotions are sometimes scarier than physical safety issues because, again, they can be so big and all encompassing. And so this grief got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I kept checking in, like, I don't think we can go any further. How much more of this is there? And like when we reached this capacity of feeling like we couldn't take any more, of just like being at the very edge of this and like all of this pain and this grief and just being completely saturated with it, it was like gone in an instant. It was removed from us because we allowed this experience. We allowed the flow of it. We allowed all of this grief to come up and get so large that we essentially reached the edge of the universe. That's the way it comes to me. I'm sure that's not a technical quantum term. We reached the edge of what our combined fields were capable of doing, me and this client. And at the edge of that field, we met that source energy and it took the grief away. Does that happen to us every day? No. Did that happen to me as a lesson that something like that is possible? Absolutely. Did it give me a framework for working with emotions by using this process of allowing them to flow and get big and then watching them dissipate? Absolutely. This is something I still work with. And this is that idea of allowing whatever experience is happening to happen, of allowing it to get as big as it needs to get, And trusting, there's where the faith comes in, trusting that you're going to flow back into that state of expansion. And for me in that experience, I got to experience like the exact moment where it shifted. And it wasn't, sometimes it's a small shift. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I cried myself out and now I'm tired and I can sleep. Sometimes that's how this works. And then maybe when I wake up in the morning, I feel a little bit lighter, even if I'm still in the grief or the sadness. But to be in that situation where it was like time had stopped and there was like this microsecond where it went from that crushing sort of weight to like this beautiful diamond gem, it was a gift that I will never forget. It was a gift that I was given to help other people recognize that it's possible. That the more we allow, the more we step into flow, the more opportunity there is for expansion. And that is what this shift is all about. It's not being in joy and bliss and wonderfulness all the time, because that is not how life works. You are not going to manifest your way out of grief. It's not going to happen. If you love anyone or anything, it can be a situation sometimes, it is going to end. Everything is impermanent. And that's something that humans, it's another one of those 3D things of this idea of like, it's all or nothing. Like, I'm in this and it's never going to end. And sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that's a bad thing, right? Not being able to see the forest for the trees, being so focused on that kind of holding this space of judgment, whatever it is, that we've forgotten that there's so much space around that. And so when you access that larger space in your field, like my experience right now, I am very much in grief and sorrow and crying and experiencing that. But I'm also in the same day, sometimes just moments later, back into this sort of expansion of love and light and flow and experiencing some joy, and then flowing back into that denser space. So what this 5D is about is accessing that flow state more often, is letting go. One of the things we're being called to release, this full moon that we just went through was so intense, asking us to release these really deep-seated things. And one of those things is rigidity, is inflexibility, is judgment. All of those things restrict our field. All of those things cause stagnation and holding. They cause stagnation and holding in the body, which leads to tension, which leads to discomfort, which leads to pain, which sometimes leads to chronic illness or even worse. All of these are reflections of the restrictions, the density, the judgment that still exists in our field. And the more we can release that, again, the more space we make, the more space we have to have grace as well for ourselves and others, to be like, oh yeah, I was kind of judgmental in that situation. I'm going to own that, I'm going to see that, and I'm going to try to do better next time. And I'm going to soften my judgments of myself. I'm going to give myself grace. I was in a discussion yesterday with someone about shame, and I was talking about the episode I did a while ago called the sneaky, slithery slug of shame. Say that 5 times fast. And this idea that shame kind of hides, and shame a lot of times is what keeps us in that contracted state. It's like we want to be good people. We want to take care of the people around us. And so when we make a mistake, it might be an honest mistake. We say something wrong, or we react kind of, off in a situation, or we get triggered by our trauma and we're reacting instead of responding. That happens to everybody. And so having grace for yourself allows you to have more grace for others as well. So then you can go back and you can say, hey, look, I'm really sorry I got triggered in that situation. I hope you can have some grace for me. I'm trying to let go of this. It's something that I'm still working on. And that is that community of like-heartedness, that community of flow, allowing grace for each other, allowing grace for ourselves. All of this is about that complexity. Things are not simple. They're not meant to be simple. And we can try to categorize things, and we can try to put them in hierarchies, and we can try to make something better or less than anything else. But the truth is, Things are not black and white. We're in 50 shades of gray. We're in a million shades of gray. It's all about nuance and complexity and understanding that there's multiple points of view in any situation, and there's multiple ways to react, and there's multiple ways to respond. And the more space we can allow for that, the more we can get into this flow, the more we are truly connecting with unconditional love. Because unconditional love is allowing. It is creating a sense of belonging for all beings. And it's really hard to access. And so right now there's a lot of stuff coming up around that. There's a lot of complexity, and if we can acknowledge the complexity and try to work within it, try to make space for it, try to allow space for the complexity to exist, that's kind of the first step toward making the field larger so that we can be in the flow. We can allow those complex situations to unfold without feeling the need to kind of grab on and tense up and control and judge and, categorize. So if you would like to access the meditation that will go with this topic, you can do that by joining the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. There is a link in the show notes for that. You will have access to all previous episodes of the show, including the bonus episodes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Allow yourself to expand, and you will find space to allow for more complexity, more flow, and more love in your life. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.